Story 1. Seeing lineups for major music festivals and not recognizing any of the performers' names. Story 2. You stop recovering from injuries. Things bother you more. You lose interest in new music to some extent. Story 3. When you start complaining about loud music and prefer going to bed early. Story 4. Not being able to accurately judge the ages of people younger than you anymore. Like finding out that the coworker you thought was in their early 20s is actually in their late 30s. True story. Story 5. Movies you went to see as a teenager are having their 40th anniversary reshowings. Story 6. I do not understand the slang of young people and I do not care to. Story 7. Doctors and nurses taking care of you are younger than you. Story 8. The smallest cut takes weeks to fully heal and disappear. Dairy just isn't worth it anymore. Things that were so important to me in my 20s and early 30s now seem small and insignificant. I sometimes throw my back out if I roll over wrong. Hangovers last for 3 days. It's not all bad though. I easily prioritize the important things. I'm much more objective. I can find happiness in any situation. I'm able to help people in significant ways. Little things don't bother me. It's peaceful being older if you choose to be. Story 9. Hey uncle, let's have a drink, said my niece. That was the moment I realized I was going to have a few drinks with someone whose diapers I had changed myself. Story 10. I saw something on Twitter today that said, "You may be old, but are you this old?" It was a Nintendo Wii remote. Story 11. I used to be able to eat whatever I wanted and not gain weight. Not anymore. Story 12. Watching everyone everywhere looking down at their phones. At home, in the street, at a restaurant, at the airport. Story 13. My lack of knowledge with today's technology requires me to call my 10-year-old in to assist me with features on my own phone. Also, meeting people the same age as you but they look much older. Story 14. That moment you realize you are more than halfway through your life. I reckon that's about 38, maybe less or more, but somewhere there. I remember as a child how some days felt like weeks and some weeks felt like months. Even an hour could take forever. Now time just flies by. Story 15. I was in the shower and accidentally pumped conditioner into my hand first because the bottles were reversed. I then pumped shampoo into my other hand and applied it first, using one hand while keeping the conditioner hand out of the water to avoid wasting it. Story 16. Just yesterday afternoon, I was leaving a local burger restaurant when I saw a beat-up mid-2000s Ford Escape parked nearby. Four college-age guys in bathing suits got out, clearly just having had a fun day swimming somewhere. It made me reminisce about those carefree summer days before classes started again. Just having fun with your friends. No responsibilities. What a time. I took it for granted. Story 17. This is a bot. This question gets asked every day. I realize I am old because I know this. Story 18. Young people. New music. Clouds. I yell at the clouds. Story 19. A couple of weeks ago, I got up from a chair wrong and sprained my foot. It hurt for 2 days. Story 20. I used to be quite tomboyish well into my early teens. After my dad introduced them to me as a kid, I used to play Call of Duty, Battlefield, Command and Conquer games, and others. Now that I have a stable full-time job, earn adult money, and bought a gaming laptop, gaming monitor, gaming chair, and headset, I find myself not really playing any of the games I used to enjoy as a kid. I mostly use these things to watch cooking shows and history documentaries. Story 21. One day, you look in the mirror and are startled by the old man looking back at you. Story 22. The fact that people born after the year 2000 are fully grown adults raises the question. How is this possible? Story 23. When I realized that 2000 in my head was just a few years ago, but was actually 24 years ago and I was still an adult then. Story 24. If you have sufficient awareness, you will notice that you are becoming invisible. It is slow, but it happens. Story 25. I'm almost 40 with no children. I'm in good shape, have no aches or pains, maintain an active friend group, and keep up with new music and technology. I still party frequently and play sports a couple of times a week. I don't notice much difference in my energy levels or pain compared to 15 years ago. What makes me realize I'm not young is seeing my parents become elderly and not as sharp as they used to be. I also see friends who have children drop off the map and seemingly age rapidly, like sports players I grew up watching who are now managers. I'm sure age will catch up with me eventually, but honestly, from my perspective, what makes someone not young anymore is falling into complacency and no longer prioritizing, for better or worse, their own body and interests. Story 26. Recovery. There is a reason most professional athletes retire in their mid-30s. Throughout my childhood, late teens, 20s, and even early 30s, I used to lift weights, be active, and play sports almost daily. Now, in my late 30s, I am sore for 2 days after playing squash. I heard LeBron James spends $2 million a year on recovery, including coaches, techniques, tools, and supplements. Story 27. All my friends are at the age where they are discussing parenting tips, while I am still single. Story 28. When you have no regrets about the unattractive but comfortable recliner couch your husband convinced you to buy. Story 29. You feel like you are still strong, but your joints become unstable. Story 30. Getting up out of a chair, observing poor grammar, noticing people wearing clothing that was fashionable when I was young. Modern music, the kind without a tune and with incomprehensible lyrics, not real music. Meeting friends and comparing symptoms or ailments. Young troublemakers on my lawn. Story 31. Having to trim ear, nose, and eyebrow hair every few weeks. Story 32. I saw some candid photos where my head was at a different angle, and I could see my bare scalp through my hair. Good old male pattern baldness. Story 33. Hearing that my coworker learned about September 11th in school. I watched that happen. Story 34. My last name is Barker. In a lifelong effort to avoid being mislabeled as Baker or Parker, I have always stated my last name as Barker, with a B as in Bob. Unfortunately, no relation. We would share a chuckle or express our fondness for good old Bob. A few years ago, I finally got my first, "Who's that?" from a young coworker, and I swear I could physically feel the gray hair start growing on my head in that moment. Story 35. Running into someone from school that I have not seen in a while and thinking about how old they look. Then a few seconds later, it dawns on me. They are my age and I am old too. Story 36. When women smile at me, it is because I remind them of their grandfather. Story 37. You start getting injuries doing the most harmless things. I pulled a muscle in my neck opening my sock drawer. Story 38. I installed some new shelves in the laundry room. Every time I walk by, I open the door and admire my proud do-it-yourself work. Story 39. Waking up twice each night to urinate, and it is not because I have been drinking beer all night. Story 40. Not being part of the young people group at work events. Story 41. A 22-year-old called me sir at the gym. Like, what the heck? I'm only 33. Story 42. Making the bed in the morning and saying to myself, I cannot wait to get back in there tonight. Story 43. Any form of jumping off something, such as a truck bed, once it hurts the knees, it is official you are not young. Story 44. It is mostly how other people treat me or act around me, especially people in their teens and 20s. They make me feel old when they tense up as soon as I enter the room, as if I am going to be strict or something. Story 45. Watching sports and at some point realizing you are older than everyone playing. Story 46. When you fall and instead of laughing, people rush over to make sure you are all right. Story 47. When you start worrying about how much is in your retirement account and if it is enough to support you for the rest of your life. Story 48. Humor test instinctive deranged zonked beneficial fade compare combative automatic. Story 49. Standing up is painful. Sitting down is painful. Lying down is painful. Everything is painful. Story 50. Turning 61 this year. Small one-day projects now take a week. I do everything slower, it seems. Story 51. When you realize you are fine with going to bed at 9 to 10 p.m. on a Friday. Story 52. When People magazine becomes Who Are These People? Magazine. Story 53. Seeing kids driving and being like, whoa, aren't they like 12? And they are actually like 18 or 19. Also feeling that the driving age is dangerously young. Story 54. Roller coasters. Trust me, you will get on them and suddenly everything hurts, your brain feels scrambled, and you wonder when these rides became so intense. Story 55. In the past, I found people who watch what they eat very annoying. Now I am that person. Story 56. Older people see you as their peers now. They will not call you darling or honey. Story 57. For me, it was the radio. I heard a commercial for an iHeartRadio concert in Las Vegas. They listed the lineup, and I had no idea who any of the performers were. Story 58. When you start telling yourself there is food at home and you will not financially recover from eating out. Story 59. Getting excited about throwing out the old kitchen sponge for a brand new one. Story 60. For me, it was seeing a 12-year-old directing traffic. No, the officer was not really 12, but he sure looked like a little kid to me. Story 61. Befriending people who have no personal memory of significant events like September 11th, because they either were not born yet or were just toddlers. I remember for a while thinking of the world in pre-September 11th and post-September 11th terms. Story 62. That's a perfectly good box you got there from Amazon. We should keep it. Maybe we can store something in it someday. Story 63. Having to prepare to put socks on, take a breath, balance, then realize you have to sit down or you will fall over because you cannot reach anyway. Daily routine these days. Story 64. Songs from my teenage years are now being played at the grocery store. Story 65. Kids wearing clothes I wore in school, especially the Nirvana and Sublime shirts. They do not even listen to the music. One kid told me she just liked the happy face. Story 66. When the clothes and styles you grew up with return with the title of vintage. Story 67. Men stopped looking at me. It seems like it happens overnight, but when it happened to me, I just knew it was about that time. Story 68. Gray hair or balding, wrinkles, growing waistline, decreased stamina, memory issues, out of touch with youth culture and new technology. Until, I am tired of this nonsense, and I do not care what you or anyone thinks. Story 69. Seeing my reflection, aches and pains, no longer trying or able to suck everything in, light bladder leakage, losing hair on my head, gaining hair on my chin. Story 70. Children. Those things are called children, and they have 100 ways of reminding you that you are not young anymore. Story 71. When the songs you used to listen to in high school are not only considered classic oldies but are also background music played in elevators. Story 72. A friend realized his parents were definitely old when his dad was excited because the weather was on soon on television. I asked my own friends to snap my neck if that ever happens to me. Story 73. Realized my mother has permanently hunched shoulders, which is hyperkyphosis because she really is, in fact, a little old lady. That is unfortunate. Story 74. New slang terms, just existing with your knees and back. And young adults at your job never having heard of Denzel Washington, Ben Stiller, Natalie Portman, or Jack Black. Story 75. A child asked me for directions the other day and then said, "Thank you, sir." Story 76. Trying on things that are in style and looking absolutely ridiculous. Story 77. Telling yourself that my generation's music was the best ever for the first time means your life is all downhill from that moment. Story 78. When dreams are no longer wet and farts are no longer dry, but vice versa. Story 79. When you hear young adults act like they know everything, then hear older adults who actually know everything, and you are just stuck in the middle wondering what is going on. Story 80. Getting drunk. I don't drink anymore, but when I did, nothing said you're old, like waking up the next day. We used to party until 2 a.m., then be at the job site at 6 a.m. and work a 10-hour day. The last time I drank was 3 years ago. I had to call out of work the next day. Story 81. When I was young, I felt I could do anything and could bounce back from anything I put my body through. About 9 months ago, I stood up and tore a bucket handle in my left meniscus. Last week, I stood up and ripped my right meniscus. Going from invincible to unable to stand without requiring surgery is definitely a sign. Story 82. I went to have my eyes checked. My regular ophthalmologist was on vacation, so I saw a younger female doctor as his substitute. We did the eye chart exam on the wall, and she told me the results. Something triggered my memory, and I said, "Wait, that's better than last time? I didn't think vision could improve." She replied, "Oh yes, that can happen. It's typical in patients who are about to need bifocals." I went home and self-deprecatingly related this conversation to my spouse, who promptly startled me by screaming, "No." I said, "What's your problem? I'm the one who's going to need bifocals." My spouse responded, "That means you're getting old, which means I'm getting old." No. Story 83. When the excitement of a Friday night is staying home and not having plans. Story 84. For me, it was when the women in Playboy were younger than I was. Story 85. The younger siblings of your friends are now having babies and earning their master's degrees. Story 86. Not having friends around. Every day is just work and home. Story 87. When major cultural touchstones are not known by anyone else in the room, it can feel isolating. I was in a room with 3 other people who did not know who Nirvana is. Story 88. Just looking in the mirror and seeing only remnants of a once young woman. Story 89. The most exciting purchase I made this year is a washing machine that washes and dries a load all in one cycle. Story 90. Seeing teenagers and people in their early 20s, I realize they look like children to me now. Story 91. The actors I liked or had a crush on in my teens are now in their 60s or 70s or have died. Story 92. 1. Needing reading glasses. 2. Looking forward to going to bed. 3. Buying shoes based on comfort and durability. Story 93. Looking at houses in places where I have no intention of living brings me a joy I cannot describe. Story 94. When you go months and years without seeing your friends because you are with family or prefer to spend time alone. Story 95. Not recognizing new movie actors and not caring. Story 96. For me, it is the unexplained aches and pains. When I was young, if I felt pain, there was a reason such as leg day, injury, or hangover. These days, who knows what that random ache is for? Maybe it is because I slept weirdly, maybe I am coming down with something, maybe it is cancer, or maybe it is nothing. Story 97. You are not young only when regrets replace your dreams. Story 98. Sitting on the sofa to watch your favorite show, falling asleep, waking up 2 hours later with a stiff neck and a cold cup of tea. Story 99. Last week, I said to a child, "You probably do not remember this, but 10 years ago," and then quietly mourned my youth for a moment. Story 100. When you talk about having to rewind the cassette tapes when a song comes on that you remember from childhood and having to rewind each time, and someone asks what a cassette tape is. Story 101. Working in a school and seeing the birth dates of children when I was in high school. Story 102. I played Halo Combat Evolved back in the day. The 10th anniversary edition is 10 years old. Story 103. Seeing the children in my apartment come back from their school and just hang out with their friends. Life used to be so easy as a child, yet we all thought it was hard. Story 104. When you trip and realize you cannot catch yourself and actually fall. Story 105. When you go to lightly hop off something, then reconsider the jump. Story 106. Seeing an event for my upcoming 20-year high school reunion. Story 107. My knees, damn it. They stopped working correctly in my late 40s. I used to laugh at the "I have fallen and I cannot get up" commercial. I am headed that way and I hate it. Story 108. Hangovers last longer than the parties that caused them. Story 109. When I am at work after going to bed at 2:30 last night, I realize how useless I am without 8 hours of sleep. Story 110. Hitting something and knowing it will cause a bruise, then not understanding why you have a bruise a day or two later. Story 111. Realizing most of your bodily pain is caused by sleeping just a little differently than usual and waking up in pain most mornings instead of well rested. Even if you are not waking up in pain, you still are not well rested for an unknown reason. Story 112. Society decided one day to start calling me madam instead of miss, and I am not a fan. Story 113. Hearing the word classic attached to the music you loved most as a teenager or young adult. Story 114. I do not get invited to after parties anymore, but that could also be because I am annoying. Story 115. Hearing the music I used to rock out to as background music in the doctor's office waiting room. Story 116. When you start to realize you cannot get the job you want because you are overqualified. Story 117. New music sounds terrible. I understand older people now. The older I get, the less I want to be around others. Slang, what did you say? Food, some foods I love no longer agree with me. Story 118. When I say I saw Star Trek, the motion picture when it came out in theaters. Story 119. Clothing styles you wore in high school are coming back for the third time. Story 120. When you get pulled over by a police officer for speeding. Story 121. Seeing people 20 years younger than me responding to this question. Story 122. I used to be able to spin my right arm in circles very fast and launch a cricket ball at high speeds. Now, if I go faster than 1 revolution per minute, my shoulder locks up for a week. I also cannot raise my left arm above my neck. Story 123. Videos of people reacting to 1990s music and not recognizing it. Story 124. I met someone who I thought was getting old. He was younger than me. Story 125. I was at a concert and thought how cool it was. Then I looked around and saw only older people sitting near me. Story 126. Getting excited about purchasing vacuum cleaners, marionette lines, men making comments like, "You still have most of your looks," etc. Story 127. When you catch a look at your parents and are reminded of how your grandparents looked when you were a kid. I saw a recent picture of my dad on Facebook, and my jaw dropped because for a second I saw my grandfather. Story 128. You know you are not young anymore when you get excited about canceling plans. Your back has more cracks than your phone screen, and staying up past 10 p.m. feels like an extreme sport. Oh, and let us not forget the moment you realize that new music just sounds like noise. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.